There is a single number that quietly decides how big your software business can ever get. And most solo founders never work it out because it sounds like something only an accountant needs. You look at revenue, you feel good, money is coming in. But revenue is not the number that sets your ceiling. The number that sets your ceiling is how much of that revenue you actually keep after the cost of delivering the service. And that is your gross margin. Today, I want to explain what gross margin means for a one-person software business, why it quietly caps how much you can afford to spend to grow, roughly what a healthy margin looks like, and the costs that solo founders almost always forget to subtract. I run my own small software businesses, and I work this number out for each of them because it changes what I am allowed to do. I am not an accountant, and I am not here to sell you a shortcut to riches. I am the person who adds up the hosting bill, the payment fees, and the tools it takes to keep the service running, then checks how much of each dollar is left over. So this is the plain version, the way I would explain it to a friend who just shipped their first paid product and has never once thought about what it costs to serve a single customer. And I will be honest about where this number can mislead you, because a margin you trust without understanding is worse than not knowing it at all. What gross margin actually is. Gross margin is the share of your revenue that survives after you pay the direct cost of delivering your service. You take your revenue, you subtract what it costs to actually run the thing for your customers, and what is left, written as a percentage, is your gross margin. If you keep 80 cents out of every dollar after those delivery costs, your gross margin is 80%. That is the whole idea. It is not your profit, because it ignores marketing and your own salary. It is simply the money left to work with before you have spent a cent on growth, the cost of delivering the service. The tricky part is knowing which costs actually count. Gross margin only subtracts the cost of serving customers, sometimes called your cost of revenue. For a software business, that usually means your hosting, the payment fees you hand to Stripe or PayPal on every charge, any third-party services your product calls on, and the support it takes to keep customers running. It does not include your advertising, your laptop, or the months you spent building the product before anyone paid you. Those are all real costs, but they belong to other numbers. Gross margin is strictly the cost of delivering what you have already sold. Why software margins are high? Here is why software is such a good business. Once you have built the product, serving one more customer costs very little. An extra user might add a few cents of hosting and a small payment fee. But you are not manufacturing anything. You are copying software that already exists. That is why healthy software businesses often run gross margins somewhere in the 70 to 90% range, far higher than a shop that has to buy every item it sells before selling it on. Treat that range as a rough guide, not a target you owe anyone, because every product is different. Why the number sets your ceiling. Now the part that actually changes how you run the business. Your gross margin sets the ceiling on how much you can afford to spend to grow. Every dollar you keep after delivery costs is a dollar available to pay for marketing, tools, and your own time. If you keep 80 cents on the dollar, you have real room to go and spend on acquiring customers. If you only keep 30 cents, most of your revenue is already gone before you even try to grow, and there is very little left to fund it. Two businesses with the same revenue can have completely different futures, and gross margin is a big part of the reason why margin and acquisition are joined. This is why gross margin and the cost of getting a customer are joined at the hip. What a customer is truly worth to you is not the revenue they pay. It is the revenue they pay multiplied by your gross margin, the part you actually keep. A customer paying you $20 a month at an 80% margin is worth $16 a month to you in real terms, not 20. If you forget the margin and spend as though you keep the whole 20, you will overpay to acquire customers and then wonder why all that growth is not making you any richer. When low margin punishes growth, here is the trap that quietly catches people. When your margin is low, growth can actually make things worse rather than better. Imagine you keep only 20 cents on every dollar and each new customer costs real money and real support to serve. You sign up more of them, revenue climbs, and yet the extra hosting and support and fees eat almost all of it. You look busier, You feel like you are finally winning, and your bank balance barely moves. A thin margin means you run very hard just to stay in place, and pouring fuel on it does not fix the leak. The costs solo founders forget. Let me walk through the costs solo founders most often forget to subtract, because leaving them out makes your margin look far better than it really is. The first is payment processing. Every charge hands a small percentage and a fixed fee to your payment provider, and on small monthly subscriptions, that fixed fee bites much harder than people expect. On a cheap plan, processing can quietly eat a real slice of every dollar before you have paid for anything else. The second forgotten cost is the pile of third-party services your product quietly depends on. The email provider that sends your notifications, the API you call to verify an address or send a text message, the error tracking, the analytics, the file storage, each one charges you a little per customer or per use, and together they add up to a genuine cost of delivery. I have met founders proudly quoting a 90% margin who had never added up the dozen small tools their product calls every time a customer uses it. The third is support, and this is the one people resist counting because it is their own time. Answering questions, fixing broken accounts, walking a confused customer through a feature. All of that is a cost of delivering the service, even though no invoice ever arrives for it. If you value your hours at even a modest rate and fold support into your cost of revenue, a product that felt wildly profitable can suddenly look more ordinary. That is not bad news. It is just the honest number. There is a fourth cost that hides inside your own pricing. Free trials and free plans cost real money to serve, because those users consume hosting and support while paying nothing. If a big share of your usage comes from people who never pay, your true cost of serving the customers who do is higher than it looks, and your real margin on the paying side is thinner than the headline suggests. How to actually calculate it? Let me make this concrete with round numbers, and please treat these as an illustration, not a benchmark for your business. Say you bring in $5,000 of monthly recurring revenue, which everyone shortens to MRR. Your hosting costs $400. Payment fees come to $200. Third-party services add another $200. And support takes about $200 of your time. Your cost of delivering the service is $1,000. So you keep $4,000 out of the $5,000, and your gross margin is $4,000 divided by $5,000, which is 80%. That $4,000, not the headline $5,000, is what you truly have to run and grow the business. Margin on a single customer. You can run the same sum for one customer. If a customer pays $50 a month and costs you $10 in hosting, fees, and support, you keep $40 from them. That $40 is what pays to acquire them and eventually becomes profit. Knowing the per customer versions stops you signing up customers who cost more to serve than they ever pay you. Watch the trend, not one snapshot. Like most useful metrics, gross margin tells you more as a trend than as a single snapshot. Watch it month over month. If your margin is slowly sliding, something in your cost of delivery is growing faster than your revenue. Maybe a heavy new customer. Maybe a third-party tool that raised its prices. Maybe support quietly eating more of your week. A margin drifting downward is an early warning worth chasing before it reaches your profit line. When a lower margin is fine, I want to be fair here, because a lower margin is not automatically a failing business. Some perfectly good software businesses carry real delivery costs, heavy data processing, expensive infrastructure, a service that leans on a costly third party. The point is never to hit a magic percentage. It is to know your own number honestly and price and spend accordingly. A 60% margin business that understands itself will beat an 85% one that is quietly fooling itself every single time. What the number cannot tell you. Here is the honest limit on all of it. Gross margin tells you how much of each dollar you keep after delivery. It does not tell you whether your price is right, whether your customers are happy, or whether the business will survive the year. A beautiful margin on a product nobody wants is still a dead end. The number is one instrument on the dashboard, not the whole verdict, and it is certainly not financial advice about your particular situation. Use it to see how much room you have, Then make the real decision with your own judgment. How to widen the margin? If your margin is thinner than you would like, there are honest ways to widen it, though none of them are magic. You can raise your prices, which lifts revenue without adding much delivery cost. You can cut the third-party tools you are paying for but not really using. You can move heavy free users onto paid plans, or trim what a free plan includes. You can right-size your hosting instead of paying for capacity you never touch. Each of these lifts the share of every dollar you keep, and none of them promise a result. They just hand you a wider ceiling to work under. If this made gross margin feel less like accountant jargon and more like a number you can actually use, that is exactly what I am going for. Every one of these explainers lives in writing at dataresearchanalysiscollection.com. The whole metric library in plain English, so you can sit down with your own hosting bill and payment fees and work your real margin out slowly. No hype, no promises about your results. Just the numbers explained clearly so you can make your own call. So to recap, gross margin is the share of revenue you keep after the direct cost of delivering your service. Things like hosting, payment fees, third-party tools, and support. Software margins are usually high because serving one more customer costs so little, often in the 70 to 90% range. That margin sets the ceiling on how much you can afford to spend to grow, because you can only ever spend the part of each dollar you actually keep. Add up every delivery cost honestly, including the small tools and your own support time. Watch the trend rather than a single month. And remember, the number shows you your room to move, never whether the business is truly working. I will see you in the next one.